in the military then become kind of radicalized. And I'm not sure that that serves the peace initiative that on the other side of that coin is being talked about. I mean, if you have these 18-year-old kids who come out of their military experience in Israel feeling like, feeling so extremely as if they need to protect at any cost, I just don't know that that serves the larger purpose, and I wonder if you'd comment on that.
Yes, thank you for the question. It's a very good one. So, I'm one of those that was conscripted and served, and it's not just to do this 3 or 5 or whatever years service. You're actually serving for about another 30, which is the reserve service. I was, I think it's a captain, and I was called in the reserve because I was mature enough and grown up enough and was doing kind of these kind of things of working with Palestinians, letting them through the blockades, checking them on one hand, but on the other hand, being the compassionate and so on. That's the one thing. So they do bring in the more adult to do this kind of job on reserve services. Okay, but that's not only the only answer. The other answer is that the first thing that they teach you as in your basic training, in the very basic training, that you have to follow each and every order that you are given. Stands for reason, isn't it? But then in the same breath, they're also telling you, you are not allowed to obey a blatantly illegal order. A blatantly illegal order. At the same breath. And now you, the 18-year-old kid, have to make this decision and analysis whether it is just illegal order or blatantly illegal order. Okay? So, some kids make a mistake in this judgment. But in this case, this is a situation in which you are putting such a high responsibility on these quote-unquote kids. I don't call them kids. They are youth or young adults, okay? And definitely this makes them more adults. Having said that, I'm not saying that people do not make mistakes. But if you're looking into the history and the current affairs that happen, Israel is very strong about criticizing and making critiques of its own. There is a investigating committee of the military police now that is working, investigating something like 50 cases of potential use of excess force in the last confrontation. I don't think that anybody of you knew about it. So without any request from the UN, human rights, whatever, Israel is doing it. And people are being court-martialed, and if they are doing this, what I said, oh, you did something which is blatantly illegal. So that's, I hope it answers your question.
I also, though, I'm just thinking the attitude that they develop as they are thinking security at any cost, they're going to take that with them in life. I'm just thinking about the attitude that they develop while they're in the military in those initial years, that security at any cost is what we're aiming for, how that's going to just figure into the rest of their life.
It does, just as well as seeing the suffer and the difficult lives that these guys are living, the Palestinians. So that's why you have very strong left wing and right wing, okay, coming out of the youth. And they are protesting and they are working against other fellow Israelis that are destroying the plans of the Palestinians. So you have both. The influence works both ways.
Well, I'm going to exercise my control here.
Bravo.
Because we knew that even spending a day would be inadequate. But from my point of view, this section is going to be the payoff of the day. I know there are other things. Would you let us hold the further audience participation to this next segment and see where we can get. And if there's some things that need clarification, well, in the context of trying to move forward, bring them up. But meanwhile, let's proceed. I beg your forgiveness for being a little heavy-handed here, but I've seen conferences that have gotten out of hand because proper control hasn't been exercised. So let me start with you, Bob, because we haven't seen much of you since the morning. You showed us how messy the birth of Palestine, so to speak, after World War I was. It was because the British made these conflicting promises, and even having the British there was disturbing. Are you in despair that this problem is intractable, or do you see, from an historical perspective, a way forward?
Well, history might, in fact, be the problem. The more you rely on your history, historians love to say, you know, if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it. In this case, everybody knows a lot of the history, and they just are delighted to repeat it, to try to revise it. That's known as revising history, revisionist history. And sometimes I've told my students, I said, why don't we just put the past down, start from scratch, and see if you can move forward? Because what history does is brings up all of, usually not the positives. Most of the negatives, most of the conflicts, most of the reasons why you're wrong and I'm right. I can prove it from history. I mean, how many times have people said that? You're wrong, I'm whatever, because we're going to use history to prove the point. It doesn't always do that. In this particular case, I mean, both sides know their history. Now they may have, as I think the word that you like to use, Herb, is a good one. Both sides have their narrative. And that's the narrative they know. And that's the narrative they're going to use to walk into the future. They're going to drag that narrative with them. And so my hope is, in terms of this, is that you can move forward without dragging the narrative with you. Now, I'm not sure how you do that. How do you get rid of your past? How do you, today in Israel, move forward in security when you're preoccupied with security? You've gone through the Holocaust, you've survived, but you're going to that's going to come with you into the future. To the Arab community in Palestine, they've seen disaster after disaster after disaster. The longer it goes on, the worse it gets. The longer it goes on, the more hatred is fueled. The lack of understanding grows. I mean, the situation today in the occupied territories is far more worse than it was in 1948, far more worse than it was back in 1918, when the problem was first analyzed. So it tells us that somehow knowing and being part of the past is going to guide us into the future. I think we have to know how to choose our facts, how to choose where we want to go, and so forth. But the fact is, but you've got to move forward. And that's the only possibility we have. We have to move forward, and we have to let the past, I mean, look, the other example. In the Balkans, the last war is based on their past. Serbs, Croatians, Turks, that goes on forever and ever and ever, back a good 1,000 years. And every time it comes into the open again, they're dragging the past in order to produce the future. They're going to create Greater Serbia. Or they're going to create a Greater Albania, which is an extension of Turkey and Islam. They're trying something all the time. It doesn't seem to work. Now, I think it would be the height of naivety for me or anybody else to expect that suddenly in Palestine, between Arabs and Jews, that somehow they're just going to forget everything that's happened. Because the longer the encounter takes place, the longer the abuse takes place, the longer the confrontation takes place, the worse it's going to get. Someone has to step in and say, look, stop, think, let's rethink this whole thing. It's naive of me to think that anybody's going to do that. Because I think actually what Rabbi David said, dealing with the issue of security is very plain. It's there. I mean, there is a big issue here that has to be dealt with. At the same time, that narrative totally ignores, for the most part, what has gone on with the Palestinians for so long. Moving ahead is not going to be easy. We've been trying to move ahead on this issue for over 80 years. It's a long time. Am I hopeful? Well, yeah, because I think you have to be hopeful. If you're not at the least bit hopeful, what's the point? You have to be hopeful, and you have to start from some point.
So let me turn to you now with a particular question. And that is, do you think that the two parties there, am I okay? Can you hear me?
Oh, no, just a little further away from you.
A little further away.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry. Do you think the two parties who are locked in this conflict, in this very small area, are able to work this out by themselves? Or do you think that they need help? And if so, do the people who've been supposedly helping them, particularly the United States, are these the right parties to do it? So that's a two-part question. Okay, you're probably more acute than I. One, do you think these two people can do it by themselves? Two, if not, who do you think would be the most helpful in bringing together in a way that on the one hand recognizes the terrible pain and suffering that the Palestinians are living under, and on the other hand, Israel's legitimate security concerns?
First, let me start with that, Bob. I didn't agree to everything that you said in the first time. I do agree with what you said now about living in the past. I think that if we are keeping on looking at the past, won't take us anywhere. There is a situation now on the ground. Whether it is right or wrong, whatever, that's the situation as it is now. There are two parties, as you said, that have legitimate aspirations and needs. And I'm putting them together because aspirations can turn into needs in the mind of the one that has these aspirations. So as far as I'm concerned, these are the same. These needs are well known to both parties. I don't think that the Palestinians don't know and understand what are the needs and aspirations of Israel, nor the Israelis don't know what are the aspirations and needs of the Palestinians. So if there will be the wisdom within both sides' leaders, and having it in one side leader doesn't help anything. Okay? If there will be that wisdom that would enable them to look at the past only to generate the legitimate aspirations and needs, if you will, then the solution is there. And I think that the solution is known to both parties. it is known to the 95% of its details even. Okay, it has been discussed so many times and negotiated so many times and has been put on the table. It's on Google, wherever you want to do it. Okay, it takes the courage of two sides leaders to do it. For the second part of your question, or third part, whatever it was, about can they do that themselves, I will answer it with the third part. If they can't, nobody can help them. That is, you are mentioning the US as a broker. They are not perceived by the Palestinians as a fair broker. And on the other hand, unfortunately, the way I see it now with the current US foreign policy, they don't really understand the mindset, the way of thinking, etc. of other people than the Western world. And unfortunately, we are not in the Western world. We are the locals, or whatever you want, the natives, if you will, to call it. So I think that there is some lack of understanding. But then I want to add just a little kind of anecdote that will give the wisdom to this situation. It's kind of a joke, a Jewish joke. So this one guy comes to the rabbi and tells him, look, my neighbor Jacob is really, I cannot live next to him. His cows come and eat my crop, and I don't have anything to feed my kids. So the rabbi says, you know what, Moshe, you're right. I'll go and talk to this Jacob. 2 minutes later, comes Jacob in, and he says, I really can't deal with this guy. His cows come and this guy throw stones at my cows and scares them away. I have no milk, and so on and so forth. So you know what? I think you're right. I will talk to your neighbor about this and try to figure it out. His wife is listening to him in the kitchen and comes out. It's all time before we had women liberation. Okay, so she comes out and says, excuse me, Rabbi, how can you say to this guy you are right and to that guy you are right? He thinks a little bit and says, you know what, you are also right. So that is, the Palestinians have certain rights to that claims. The Israelis have certain rights to what they claim, and the path or the median or the solution is there. And if you would like to hear my opinion of what is the solution, I'll be happy to share it with you. But it is all known. It only takes the courage of two leaders like Sadat and Begin at the time to do this leap of faith and get there.
I'm going to say one thing, and then, Wes, you may not have heard me, but we made an agreement that as soon as we turn this over to the audience, we'll first hear from women, and then when they're...
There's none up there.
We covered that. Okay, and we've come to, I think, an agreement. It may not have been perfect, but I think it's workable. I'd like to say this, that there are forces on both sides that make it very difficult for either side internally to produce the kind of leader with the wisdom and courage that you say is needed. The power of the settlers now, over 500,000, and their influence on Israeli politics is a huge stumbling block on the one side, as well as, and connected with it, a strain that always has said, all of this land God gave to us. So that's on the one side. On the other side, there are people like, as Rabbi Zavla said, Hamas, who believe that Israel has no right to exist at all and should be pushed into the sea. This, it seems to me, makes it almost impossible for the two sides to themselves generate the will and the wisdom to find a solution. So I just want to hold out the thought that, like any dispute that needs mediation, we need to find a proper mediator. And the United States, as you said, is not a proper mediator, and maybe just the Western powers aren't, for the good reason you said. I think that we do need a multinational and mostly non-Western mediating force that I think has to come from the UN. The last thing I will say is that right now there's an enormous asymmetry of power. It's easy to say that the Palestinians are an obstacle, but they don't have much power to be an obstacle to anything, except reluctance to enter into a proper mediation. Israel has an enormous power in this conflict. And I think that there is an arrogance of power. God knows in this country we're familiar with the arrogance of power. And I think that needs to be addressed too. So these are some thoughts, and I hope you've heard a lot of goodwill from up here. And I hope now that we can get somebody who will come and pass this microphone. Would somebody come forward, maybe Kathleen, would you be kind enough? And remember, we're going to start with women's voices, okay? So put up your hand and Kathleen will bring you the mic, and maybe you'll do better with it than I do.
Well, I've been listening all day and learning an awful lot, so thank you very much. My feeling is that we need the two mothers on each side, you know, mother or grandmother, one on each side, to talk about this together, because I think that would bring a more peaceful solution. First of all, you have to drop the religion idea that we were created for this homeland. You know, that makes people very angry. It can be in your mind, but you don't want to say it. You know, it's important that we go down to basic things: protection of our children, protection of our homeland, that kind of thing, without bringing in, we have a right here, which makes people inflamed. That's my feeling after listening all day. I agree with this, everybody's right, but I think the mediator should be two mothers, one on each side.
Thank you. Kathleen, Nancy back in the right back there, she's had her hand up a good while.
Hi, thank you for what you're doing here. It's extremely urgent and important. I personally was a member of the Middle Eastern Ministry at All Saints Church for 5 years. So I've read a lot of the books, seen a lot of the documentaries, and I'm here to share the glad tidings that actually there are quite a few grassroots people in Palestine, Christians, Palestinians, and Jews, who are refusing to be enemies. And they are creating the interfaith bonding, the mothers, the schools, drumming groups that they all get together and drum together, and that type of thing. So there is hope. Part of the hope, which has not been mentioned here today, is a one-state solution. Because before 1948 and the Zionist movement, everybody got along pretty well. And there were 2,000 years of human history that had already occurred. So it can be done, but separating and dividing into a two-state solution does not address the problem of the city of Jerusalem, where all three major religions have their holy sites. In the future, there is the possibility that the extremists who want to restart daily sacrifices, beginning with red heifer at the Dome of the Rock, could do that. They could actually sneak in there and do that, in which case the United Nations would have to surround the city of Jerusalem with armies and restore peace. So why wait until that happens? One solution, besides a one-state solution where everybody has equal human rights, is to make Jerusalem an international city of peace.
So I just want to respond for a second to that idea about Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a city of peace when it's in Israel's hands, and everybody is free to pray according to their own religion and to go everywhere. But that aside, what I wanted to say is that I believe the hope for the future of this region is in the children. I know in Israel there are many, as you mentioned, grassroots organizations that bring children together. I showed them in my slides where they do sports groups with Israelis and Arabs, drama troupes with Israelis and Arabs. It's all over Israel. And I believe it would be all over Palestine if the people had any power to rise up and throw off the yoke of terrorism. Because they're afraid in Palestine to do anything, because what happens with people who want to teach tolerance and love is that they're persecuted as not being loyal to the Palestinian cause. But if that could be, if those terrorists could be removed from power and the people could regain their power, and they would teach their children, like Israelis are teaching their children, there would be peace.
Over here. No, women first, we said that, and then Faisal, you'll be the first man.
Hi, I've only been here since noon, but I've been thinking about this problem for a long time. And what bothers me is my place in this problem. We're talking about the Israelis and the Palestinians, but I want to talk about us for a minute. We give all this foreign aid. Think about the foreign aid we're giving. We're not giving bags of rice and clothes. We're giving weapons. This country gives the military, from our country, gives the military other, military weapons to other militaries. And it isn't just here, it's everywhere. So shame on us. And at some point, it's going to have to take people like us, and maybe as Ruth suggested, women and mothers and grandmothers, to stand up against all these men in the Pentagon. I'm sorry, guys. And start turning this around and saying, I'm sorry, this is not acceptable. You're not going to kill anymore in my name.
Liz Estrada.
Any more women? I see two more women, then we'll have Faisal, who's been very patient.
A thought or two on Rabbi Zaslow's talk. And also, this was a comment I heard this morning. I heard Rabbi Zaslow say, yeah, the problem here is Iran. The foremost promoter, not his exact words, but of terrorism. He said that at least. No evidence, by the way. He didn't speak to any evidence to this, but he said that. So Rabbi Zaslow, and I I guess my other comment, or maybe one of you could visualize. Can we visualize, I like that, Jerusalem, an international city, and let's say the UN runs that. And then Israel-Palestine, okay, one state, Israel-Palestine, and it's not a religious state. Is that something that we can visualize?
Thank you. There's another woman back there who would like to speak.
Okay, well, what I see as part of my own 95 years of life, and having been a former ardent Zionist as a young person up until I was about 40 years old, I have seen the entire world, Palestinians, Jews, Orientals, whoever, thinking that the solution to conflict is war. Militarism has been the sworn process by which I think the majority of people have said they would find a good life. Well, that is being tried now, and I think is a failure by the Israelis. Netanyahu did not even want to continue peace talks until he had an assurance that nobody else would have any military power. You all heard him say that last week. My personal feeling, I would love to see it before I pass on, but I don't think it's possible with this kind of mindset. We must have a spiritual, not a religious, but a spiritual answer. Everybody wants life. Nobody wants to be shot through the head or told they must do what you want them to do. That has been the Israeli